progress.
Hour 6 is upon us, and let's call the meeting to order. This is the monthly meeting for the Alameda County Water District, January 11th, 2024. Secretary, please call the roll, please.
Directors Huang. Here. Akbari.
Here.
Sethy.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
And Gunther.
Here. And this evening, I will now turn to my fellow veteran, Mr. Weed, on the other end of the table and have him do the salute for the flag for this evening. Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Public, are there any public comments on this for this meeting?
And as we seek public comments, President Gunther, I'd be happy to do some quick housekeeping remarks just to make sure that everybody
Yes.
knows how they can contribute to the board meeting.
Certainly.
So first of all, Happy New Year, everybody. Our first meeting of 2024 and our first meeting with our new district secretary, fully in place and stability all around, except for your general manager who's got something going on in his head, so he's masked up this evening. Feels fine, but sounds weird. So on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public present in person who wishes to make comments may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials for this meeting are all available on the district website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Again, thank you all for attending. And President Gunther, that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you very much. And once again, we'll look about for more public comments and still none. Zoom attendees, looks like it's still 0 as well.
Still 0.
So let's move on then to the consent calendar. I believe we have a change.
That's right, President Gunther. Staff, of course, recommends, according to your agenda, that items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5 be added to the consent calendar. Staff also recommends that item 4.3 be removed from the agenda. That event's not going to occur as was planned, so staff proposes just to remove the item.
Okay, hearing that, do we have any motion to add items to the consent calendar from the board?
I will make the motion to remove item 4.3 from the consent calendar and add items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5.
I have a motion.
I'll second.
You have a second.
And just to clarify the motion, the item for 4.3 is not just to remove it from the consent calendar, but to also remove it from the
On the
agenda.
agenda. Thank you.
So that'll remove 4.3 from the agenda. Comments on the board? Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Directors Huang. Aye. Akbari.
Aye.
Sethy.
Aye.
Weed.
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. And we
I
have a request. Oh,
will make motion to adopt the consent
Yes, we
calendar
need that.
as amended.
And I'll second.
Directors Huang. Aye. Akbari.
Aye.
Sethy.
aye.
Weed.
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. A little rusty.
Right, we got
So-
a new board president this year
Yep.
too. You got to relearn the ropes all over again. It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
On item 4.3, which was removed, there was a hope to go visit the Yorba Linda PFAS facility, which is one of the more advanced and largest in the United States. And that will, they hope to reschedule that now to coincide with the ACE 24, which is AWWA's national committee, national conference, which will be in Anaheim in June 10th through 13th of this year. And they'll probably have a bigger group and they hope to get a bus.
I'll look forward to that item then, future. And moving on to item 5.6.
I'd like to note that I will be abstaining and leaving the room on this one. I own property within the magic distance of whether it be 500 or 1,000 feet of Alameda Creek and Niles.
Actually, I'd like to, I forgot, we're gonna move Mr. Clay up if we can.
Yeah, so appreciate, thank you, President Gunther.
Stay in the room. John.
Yeah, if it's pleases the board, yeah, please
Stay,
don't
John.
leave.
Please
Yeah,
don't leave,
Director Weed, you're good. We'll get to item 5.6 in a moment. But first, staff proposes that we go ahead and move item 6.3.1, the state legislation year-end report by JGC Government Relations, up in the agenda. And we tackle that item before we get to item 5.6. For a number of reasons, but importantly, our special guest, Jonathan Clay, is having his birthday today. He's the ripe old age of, I think, 52. So happy birthday, Jonathan. And, you know, actually, I've always wanted to say this. Here's Johnny. But to show Jonathan that we did for your birthday. And even though we didn't make you wear a party hat, we still wanted to recognize this special day.
You're lucky no member of the public is on.
Oh, I'm sure I'd provide all sorts of entertainment for them. Well, thank you very much, General Manager, President Gunther, board members. Pleasure to be here tonight. I was envisioning that I would have some sort of pointy hat on with sparkles on it, but thank you very much. Aaron Gilbert, who wasn't able to attend today, we both greatly appreciate working for the board. And I'm going to give kind of just a look back of this past year. I'll also touch on just what we're going to be looking at also for this upcoming year. Lots of things have already been happening in Sacramento in the last 2 weeks, but you know, I think last year, the best way to describe it, water rights was really the big issue within the water community. We had 3 pieces of legislation that would fundamentally realign how water rights were addressed in California, moving through the legislative process. And ultimately, at the end of the day, only one of those measures, SB 389 by Senator Allen, which had to do with investigative orders, made it through the process and was signed into law by Governor Newsom. The other 2 measures are sitting in the Senate right now. And just as a preview, they will try and bring those back up at some point later this year. The environmental community and the sponsors of those bills have not given up yet. And as a reminder, because you've probably heard lots of discussions at Aqua about this, AB 460 by Assemblymember Bauer Cahan had to do with interim relief. That this is how the water board or some other group can petition the water board to inject themselves into a water rights process and make decisions. And of course, that generated a lot of concern within the water community because a lot of folks rely on the court process and due process as the best way to try and get through those complex cases. But those are also complex cases that can take many years. And so there are folks that want to try and speed that up. And then the second bill is AB 1337 by Assemblymember Wicks, also another Bay Area legislator, and her bill had to do with water curtailments. So think back to during the drought when users were told to reduce by 10 or 20%. This would also impose curtailments upon senior water rights holders. And there are groups of folks that feel that senior water rights aren't subject to curtailments, and there's other folks, including the water board. And you know, if you look in the Delta estuary, there have been curtailments against senior water rights holders, and that's being adjudicated. So, water rights was kind of the big issue last year. Some of the other ones that we, as the district, focused on. we had, there were a number of groundwater rights or groundwater bills that we focused on. We didn't necessarily directly engage on, but definitely had our attention. We were tracking closely. Assemblymember Pappen, who's now the new chair of the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee in the Assembly. She had two companion bills that had to do with water supply planning, and a second one that effectively was asking you to identify different classes of water users and then identify who your highest users were. So those bills got amended. One stalled, the other one did move through, but it was amended in a way to make it palatable to the water community. I think looking forward to this year, we have, as I just mentioned, Assemblymember Pappen is the new chair of Water Parks and Wildlife. We don't have a good sense. She's a newer member of what are going to be her priorities. She has signaled in a news article that she may not be as open to some of these water rights discussions. And then on the Senate side, the current chair of Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee is also running for Congress. So the likelihood that he will be leading the charge on any big pieces of water legislation are probably not really going to happen. So this is going to be kind of, I think, an interesting year as it relates to legislation. The bonds were definitely a topic for last year and will continue to be this year. Likely to see there's two competing bond measures, one in the Senate, one in the Assembly. I'd say the two authors are pretty aligned on it. It usually ends up being more of a fight between the Senate and the Assembly of who gets to put their stamp on getting the measure. If I had to guess, I think Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia will be the one to kind of move the final vehicle forward. But before that happens, and that will need to happen sometime in April, May to be on the November 24 ballot. I think though the thing that's going to drive any discussion for bonds on the November ballot will be Proposition 1, which was put forward by the legislature and the governor's proposal on funding for homelessness and behavioral health, mental health services. That's on the March 5th primary. And if that does well, I think you'll see a resources bond move forward for November. You'll also probably see a housing bond and an education bond. If that bond fails, I think all kind of bets are off on what's going to be moving forward for November. Not so much because maybe the voters won't vote support them, but because I think the governor will continue to try and clear the deck of other bonds and move something forward related to his homelessness and behavioral health, because so much of what he did in this last legislative year is dependent on that funding. And so if that fails, and you know, some polls say it's going to do great, other polls, or in my view, common sense, a Republican primary is not necessarily the best place to take a $6 billion bond for homeless funding. So it'll be kind of a dynamic year. I also think both of the water bonds, resource bonds, are close to 20 billion right now with all the projects in them. And given that they're going to have to share the ballot with both a housing and a education bond, I think it's safe to say that if I had to guess, that bond will probably get cut in half and be more around the $10 billion range. It seems from just discussions with the governor's office, finance, and others that around 25 billion is the magic number that they're thinking that the state's going to be able to support in the debt service. And so I think if the governor's bond passes, then you kind of take 6 billion off the top, and then you've got roughly 20 billion to play with between the three remaining bonds. So Aqua, looking to this year, is going to be bringing two sponsored bills from the association forward. One having to do with Prop 218 and protest votes before the voters. Another related to cleanup to a piece of legislation that went through a year ago, SB 3 by Senator Dodd, related to protections for smaller than 200 connection water providers. There's some technical fixes that need to be done there. So those are the two proposals that Aqua is going to be moving forward. And then I've been in conversations with Assembly Member Lee's office about the concept that the district has had around looking at what can be done to facilitate, turf rebate programs, specifically looking at low-income households and individuals. And so it was really timely. The legislative analyst released a report just about a week or two ago as related to the water legislation from back in 2018. That report had some interesting criticisms of the state, but one of the final recommendations is that the state should be stepping in and helping a bit more with low-income individuals. And so in talking with Assemblyman Lee's office, I think there's an interest. They, though, are also looking at the deficit, and I'll touch on that here in just a minute, and trying to figure out bills that can move forward that don't have a cost to the state, and so that they can actually have a chance of getting them through and to the governor. And so right now, governor released his January budget proposal yesterday. I will note that the legislative analyst, who's the sort of the independent advisor to the legislature, had pegged the total deficit, including this year, previous year, as $68 billion. The governor announced that his idea of the size of the deficit is only $38 billion. So if I had to kind of think back, I think it goes all the way back to the Schwarzenegger administration when we had dueling estimates of what the deficit is. That's a big gap between those two numbers. I think the legislature will probably want to go with the governor's number because that just means less cuts. But that's going to be a very interesting and dynamic process for this year. Also for this year, we have the new speaker. He's got his new committee chairs in. He's reconfigured the committee makeups. So you have new members on those committees. And then on the Senate, mid-February, we'll have the transition from the current Senate Pro Tem Atkins to Senator McGuire. He'll be the new Senate Pro Tem leader. To note, that's going to be the first time in my memory that we've had leaders in both houses from rural communities and not someone that at least one member from either LA or San Francisco. So just interesting to note. And that also then means we'll probably likely have not as many as occurred on this assembly side, but we'll have some committee chairmanships shift. Also with the March primary, you may have like Senator Portantino, who's chairing Senate Appropriations, which is a very important committee. If he wins, he'll likely probably not be able to retain his committee chairmanship. So there'll be a little bit of shifting around. So just a kind of a roundabout way of saying it's going to be kind of a dynamic year this year. So I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about. One last thing as it relates to the budget. Last year's budget, the governor had made around $2 billion worth of, I won't call them cuts, but shifts in the budget within the resources, water, climate change area to, at that point, a yet to be named resources bond. There are additional cuts this year within that same kind of sphere. So there's a lot riding on a bond moving forward. But I think I bring that up because I think the funding that has been readily available for the last few years within resources for water, climate change, adaptation and stuff, I think that those purse strings are going to be tight for a little while as they try and figure out the deficit, what's a funding source, and shift things around. So I think with that, I will catch my breath and see if there's any questions.
I have a couple.
Good start.
So Jonathan, in the Fremont Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee, we've done 2 deep dives with opposing parties that have presented to us on ACA3, constitutional amendment. And I am wondering whether it would be your recommendation that ACWD take a firm position on that, or maybe try to align ourselves with water districts within Aqua. Because it seems that if that were to pass, it could be very damaging.
And ACA3, are you talking about the business roundtable proposal that would put further restrictions on what
Yeah,
the votes? Yes.
back by Howard Jarvis.
Yep. So, yes, there's a whole host of folks that are lining up against that. It would complicate, I think, local government's efforts to try and pass different types of tax measures. I would just say, me personally, in representing local government, I always try and stay out of elections. So, because invariably you always upside one side or the other. And so I think if it's my advice to the district would be if there are significant and serious challenges that get posed by that, then by all means, yes, the district should engage. But sometimes it might be best, especially for a district such as the size of ACWD, to maybe not tiptoe into that political minefield.
Well, I'm on the Aqua Local Government Committee.
Yep, and Aqua is going to be
In
out
turn.
front and part of the bigger coalition to lead the charge. And to be honest, that's why you have an Aqua, is to kind of engage in those political battles like that, so that individual districts don't necessarily have to get muddied in that process.
Well, I'm going to bring it up at our first meeting and just feel people out.
Yeah. Well, and I think you will probably hear from a lot of the Aqua membership. There's a lot of folks that are going to jump in and oppose that proposal.
Mhm. And second question is, can you highlight what Aqua is trying to do on issues related to Prop 218? That's
Yeah.
very pertinent to our district.
So what they are doing is Chris Anderson, who is the lead lobbyist for it, and they are trying to reserve standing to challenge agencies' rates in court. So what they're trying to do, just trying to make sure I say this correctly, they're describing it as trying to prevent sneak attack lawsuits where a plaintiff stays silent during the rate making process, but then sues the agency after the rates have been adopted during that protest period.
Right, non-participants in the process coming back later.
Right. So that's their effort. I think that this is going to be discussed at an upcoming meeting coming, I think on the 19th. And I believe Chris is trying to find an author for that, or is anticipating that he'll be finding an author for that. I haven't actually seen the specific language, but once they kind of move forward with that, I can definitely get the language and share it with the district for the board to take a look at. But it seems like it's pretty narrow just to that issue solely.
Does our general counsel have any input?
So there was a discussion on this at the last Aqua Legal Affairs Committee, and my understanding is similar to what Jonathan said. It's basically going to be legislation that says you must participate in the objection process, object to the rates in order to be able to file a Prop 218 lawsuit. I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. I haven't seen the language, but I know the Aqua Legal Affairs, I think they might have a subcommittee that's working on this as well.
So thank you very much for all of the work that you, your firm does for our district. And thank you for picking up the baton on the idea that I had for direct installs on turf and engaging Assemblyman Lee. I thank you for that.
We really enjoy representing the district in Sacramento, so thank you all very much.
Further comments, Director Wade? No.
I'll just make one quick comment. We talked about water rights. And I don't know if this district has made a position on water rights. I know Aqua tried to make a position and couldn't come to an agreement. So we're with the flow. See what happens.
Yeah, and I think this time around, Aqua, there is not consensus within the Aqua family, I think is the best way to describe it, on approaches to this. But I do think this time there will be a more unified front in opposing the bills, because since SB 389 passed and all the different agencies had either gone neutral or were able to get to, I don't know if support is the right word, but like blissfully kind of non-opposing. I think a lot of folks are going to throw their hands up and say, nope, nothing should be moving. That just took effect. Let that kind of play out before we come back. though the underlying issue that brought all this to the head, which is the problem that happened up off of the Shasta River, where you had a water agency make the financial decision that it was cheaper to pay the fine and take the water illegally against a specific order from the water board to not take water. That has not been fixed. And so it'll be interesting to see how this kind of progresses. You know, if I were in charge of all things water, I think I would try and move from the water community's perspective, a very narrow fix to that Shasta issue, take that off the table, and then just kind of try and hold those other two measures at bay. So.
Jonathan, I have had an opportunity to pepper you with questions over the last couple months. Again, at the LICA committee meeting this past Tuesday, my question tonight is related to the governor's budget. There's you kind of touched on this a little bit, that there's a big gap between the LAO's projections and the governor's projections. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what's feeding into that 30 billion gap between the two budgets?
I haven't delved enough into to be able to talk articulately about what the full difference is. I can talk about the politics around it, which is for the legislature, and I'll take a step back. Last year we had a $30 billion deficit, but we really papered over that. And by that, I mean, there weren't a lot of hard cuts. This year was going to be a much different kind of conversation because you can only kick the can down the road so often. I think part of that difference is, and I tried to be very specific in how I said this, that $68 billion deficit number is all looking at this current budget year that we're still in, because I think $22 billion of anticipated revenue did not come in from personal income tax. And as a reminder, the top 1% of taxpayers in California effectively carry 50% of the state's budget, and the top 10% cover 80% of all the revenue that comes into the state. So that top tier of taxpayers pay the bulk. And so when the stock market gets a cold, we get the flu in California. Governor Newsom defended that very adamantly in his hearing yesterday by talking about regressive tax systems in Texas and in Florida, where they tax the lower classes proportionally higher than they tax the higher. So, but then there's things that the governor's proposing to do to cover and reduce that deficit, such as he had a compact with higher education, CSU, UC, to put more money into those systems to the tune of $500 million. He's proposing to delay that. So that shifts that cost out. So that's no longer a debt on the books. I have questions of, he seems to be making it sound like he's just going to do that. That was part of last year's budget. I wonder if he has to get the legislature's approval on that.
Well, Jonathan, just to add to what you're saying, I read through a detailed summary of what he put out yesterday. So he's dipping in for $13 billion from the rainy day fund.
Right.
He's pushing out the program that you just talked about. He's pushing out a major homelessness funding program, which is going to put the burden mostly on San Diego and Imperial County through their volunteer and their own resources. So the state will not be helping out. He's also delaying major funding on his climate change programs, which is disturbing a lot of people because he was the champion for that. And now he's putting everything on hold for up to 4 years, he says.
Right.
So all of this totals up between dipping into the rainy day fund and pushing out all these other things to fill in about $30 billion of that gap.
And we'll see what the LAO says. They tend to be, but from the legislature's perspective, they probably like the governor's number because that means less cuts that they're going to have to do. but it'll be interesting to see if the LAO agrees with these deferrals, delays. Does that really reduce the deficit as much as the governor says it's being reduced?
And he's delaying the pay increase for healthcare workers in California too, which is gonna upset a lot of.
So and see, that's another example of something he's thrown out there as a solution. He doesn't quite have the authority to do that yet. And so interesting on that one. There's been quite the behind the scenes back and forth between the administration, SEIU, and the Hospital Association on that. And there was always envisioned a trigger, but no one envisioned the trigger being popped so quickly. And there definitely seems to be, as you probably heard, because we haven't seen the details on this yet, and the governor said it would be forthcoming, but he was bothered a bit by some of the questions from the reporters and said it'll be very clear how that trigger works from our perspective. So I think that was also kind of something to note, that the governor definitely was a little more feisty, shall we say, with the reporters and some of the questioning they were asking him around that and a few other issues. So, but yeah, that if that delay happens, that's $4 billion right there that of costs to the state that are represented by that delay in the minimum wage payments for healthcare workers.
My only question. Happy birthday again.
Thank you.
And thank you for you and Aaron always providing really detailed reports at our LICA committee meetings. It's really, really helpful for us.
Like I said, we appreciate doing this, and hopefully we don't bore you too much when we get deep in the weeds on the budget stuff.
Oh, no, that's always the most enjoyable part for the LICA committee. But no, thank you. It's always a good conversation with you and Aaron during the LICA committee. And thank you for representing our district so well in Sacramento.
Thank you, Jonathan. One quick question about, I think you said Assemblymember Pappen is
Yes.
that Lou Pappen's daughter?
That is Lou Pappen's, I believe it is his daughter. Yes.
Because we have a history with her father, with John Dutra. They ran our legislation, so we are indebted to him, to her, or to her father, I should say, for the legislation for Bosca.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if that could be used for any
I think
opening, but we were ingraded to her father for running that for us with John Dutra together. Both Director Weed and I were on the board back then, so.
I remember when the big Bosca fight was occurring. So I think that's always when we meet with the new chair of Water Parks and Wildlife, I think it's always worth, reminding of some of that history, because, at times history kind of gets lost as we kind of transition from generation to generation of legislator. So.
We haven't forgotten. And that, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you for all you do.
Our pleasure.
That's it, I guess.
And just checking, again, no public online.
I swear I thought Aaron was going to log in to watch me to make sure I didn't mess up.
He's at your birthday party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All
Drive
right,
safe.
thank you.
Yeah,
right,
thank
thank
you
you.
and
you.
safe drive back.
Okay, now we can move on to item 5.6.
Right.
I made a comment earlier that I'll be leaving the room for the moment, so ask me.
Looks like we'll get it this time.
Okay, so item 5.6 is authorization of amendment to professional services agreement for fish ladder operations and environmental services. And for that item, I will ask our acting director of water resources to introduce that item.
Sure, thank you. Item 5.6, title as read. Summary: in 2022, staff selected SP Kramer Associates Incorporated, doing business as Kramer Fish Science, for as-needed fisheries support for the implementation of the district's new fish ladder operations and water stewardship program, or the FLOWS program. Kramer Fish Science helped provide the district with a successful first year of operation and within budget. Accordingly, staff has elected to extend the contract for another year. However, based on lessons learned from the first year of operations, additional funding is needed to support continued startup costs, revised operating costs of monitoring equipment, obtaining a needed lake and stream bed alteration permit, an LSA permit, from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and for contingencies such as the extreme weather events that occurred during 2023. Staff recommends that the board authorize an amendment to agreement number 4734 for additional funds of $872,000 for a 5-year contract total of up to $1,472,000. Of this total, $200,000 is for contingency funds for unseen issues, and $42,000 is for the acquisition of the LSA operating permit from CDFW. The need for this amendment was previewed with the Water Resources and Conservation Committee on November 15th, 2023, though detailed costs were not available at that time. Board approval of this item will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 2.1, maintain and enhance sustainability and reliability of local and regional water supplies. Accordingly, the recommendation by motion is to authorize the general manager to 1, execute an amendment to agreement number 4734, increasing the total not to exceed amount of the first 1-year option to $422,000, and 2, execute subsequent option years in amounts not to exceed $250,000 each for a total 5-year agreement amount not to exceed $1,472,000.
For the staff recommendation, comments, Director Sethy? None? Hearing no comments, do we have a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation as is.
Motion by Director Sethy,
I'll second.
second, Director Huang. Secretary, call the roll, please.
Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed, and Gunther.
Aye. We can bring John back in.
Keep them on ice too long.
I'll get you comfortable. Moving on then to item 5.7.
Yeah, and item 5.7 is resolution awarding contract for the main renewal Central Newark Thornton Avenue project. Really happy to be bringing another big main renewal project to the board. It's a lot of excitement here. And actually, despite what I suggested to committee when this item was reviewed, we weren't planning on doing a staff presentation on it at that time, but staff was smart enough to say, well, there's enough big stuff and moving parts here. We should make sure the board sees kind of at least the bigger picture of the whole thing. So I will ask our Director of Engineering and Technology to introduce this item, Mr. Awoke.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members and staff, and we don't have community members. So as you may recall, and as Mr. Stevenson alluded to, the board made a commitment several years ago to improving and enhancing our water infrastructure by approving our 25-year main renewal program and associated budget. And I'm happy to report, as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, that we have yet reached another milestone by completing design and advertising for bids for a mile of water main along Thornton Avenue in Newark. Tonight, staff will provide some background and details on this project, and we'll be seeking board approval for a construction contract. Project manager, Miss Andrea Bautista, is in the boardroom. She will make a presentation and read staff's recommendation. We also have Mr. Ben Egger, project engineering supervisor, to answer questions or provide additional information. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Woke, and good evening, members of the board, staff, and the public yet. I'll be presenting the resolution awarding the contract for the main renewal Central Newark Thornton Avenue project, agenda item 5.7. So the agenda for today, I'll go over the project drivers for the project, the design criteria, the scope of work, our public outreach plan during construction, professional services during construction, the bidding and construction schedule, the construction contract award, and finally, the staff recommendation. Okay, yeah, as Mr. Wook mentioned, as part of the original planning and scoping of the main renewal program, there were several projects identified at that time and selected for renewal based on the district's water main prioritization model in the central Newark area, which includes Cedar Boulevard, Thornton Avenue, Cherry Street, and Central Avenue was identified as part of that. And the main drivers for that top ranking was the age, the location had moderate susceptibility for liquefaction. There's aggressive soils in Newark, as well as proximity to leaks in the area. And also not mentioned on there, this is close to the desal facility. So these are important pipes for pushing out from that production facility. As we took a look at this area, we saw Cedar Boulevard, Central Avenue, and Cherry Street. Those pipelines are pretty complex in nature. There's multiple trenchless crossings for the railroad, flood control. They go through SFPUC easement right away. They cross the Bay Division pipelines. There's a takeoff over there. So it was best to package those streets and pipelines as a separate project and to move forward with the Thornton Avenue pipeline first. Okay, zooming in on the Thornton Avenue. As I mentioned, it runs from Cherry Street to Cedar Boulevard. It's about a mile long. And this location, Thornton Avenue, is a very busy street. It's an arterial road for the city of Newark. It's a truck route, designated truck route. You'll see on the right side, there's close on-ramps and off-ramps to I-880. And so all those businesses along Thornton Avenue, the neighborhoods, they all use this street for as an arterial road. So you'll hear me mention that many times. Okay, and as we designed this project, we kept those drivers in mind. And some of those things we'll cross off and check off just by implementing this main renewal, such as age and leaks. Those come with it. But some of the other properties like aggressive soils and the liquefiable location, we took a closer look at. And so we took a look at the USGS liquefiable susceptibility maps, and the central Newark area is more on the border of the low and moderate side. It's kind of on the border. Based on the criticality of these pipes, it makes sense to err on the side of moderate. And as we looked at previous geotech reports, we saw that those layers are deeper than where we're installing the pipes. So criteria to think about is settlement from those deeper layers of where we're installing the pipes. And so important design criteria to check those things off is pipe materials. Those play a big role to satisfy those conditions. And so I'll talk about the district approved materials. We typically use 2 materials for these main renewal programs and accepted by the district. So steel, we'll talk about that in PVC. So steel is welded at every connection points. It's welded steel, and it's considered continuous because of those welds, and fully restrained because of that. It's one continuous pipe. This provides the most seismic reliability between the two materials, which is why we typically default for that for our critical mains and large diameter mains. The downside to that pipeline is it's that whole process of installing steel and fabricating it is much longer. So we get that exactly how we show it on the drawings. And it takes months to fabricate. And once we bring it out to the field, we run into several unforeseen issues, and it takes a long process to make sure we can field fit it basically to what's out there on the streets and those existing utilities that we need to clear. And so that process translates to dollars. It's a much higher cost between PVC. So we kept that in mind. And right, so PVC, it's considered segmented plastic pipe. The way that's installed and how we, I guess, fabricate it is they come in straight segments of 20 feet, and we kind of build PVC as we go, just kind of like Legos. And the way those are connected versus welded steel is they're pushed together by gaskets, and those are kind of held in place by those gaskets. So it's a lot quicker than steel. We pretty much exclusively use these on smaller diameter pipes because we prefer that reliability from steel on critical mains. Yeah, there is some literature that says they do perform well in some minor and moderate seismic events. So there is some reliability. So keeping those properties in mind, and the project drivers that I talked about, the aggressive soils, the moderately liquefiable soils, as well as this project location is very busy to the public. We want to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. We wanted something more middle of the road versus defaulting to steel. So we opted for fully restrained PVC, and that's different than typical PVC because those joints aren't just pushed together. They're locked in place with those couplings like you see in the center of the screen. And we've got all those external restraints at all the fittings and elbows, and that provides the restraint that we typically see from steel. So that's the important things and drivers that we needed to check off for the Central New York area. So moving on to the project scope, as we mentioned, the new water main will replace approximately 5,200 linear feet a mile of the existing 12-inch and 8-inch asbestos cement pipes on Thornton that were installed between the 60s and the 70s. The new pipe will match the existing water pipe sizes, and that was verified by our hydraulic model. And the new main will be comprised of 35% welded steel pipe plus 65% of the restrained PVC that I mentioned. So we try to maximize that material as much as possible as its project. All services within this project area will be replaced. So water services and fire hydrants, fire hydrant laterals, appurtenances will be installed as required by the pipeline design. And based on this location, we know that there's potential for high groundwater. We know Thornton, there's several gas stations up and down. So there is potential for contaminated soils and groundwater if that's present. So the contractor will investigate and provide testing to confirm if either of those conditions are present and make a project-specific plan if that is the case. And to put this new pipeline into service, so it will require 15 water main system connections or closures. Right, so our plan is to, as always, keep the public informed of our progress on these construction projects. There will be impacts to the public. So we'll be sending out mailers to those within the project area as well as adjacent to the project area before the start of work. And we'll be having a public sign event near the project location, open to the public. We've kept the city of Newark informed of this project every step of the way, so they're pretty aware of what's going on. And so we'll continue that coordination during construction. And yeah, they're pretty supportive, and they've offered to use some of their communication channels to get the word out on this project. So that's good news. And right, advanced notification of interruption to water service as part of putting this new pipeline into service. So. Okay, so I haven't stressed it enough. Thornton Avenue is a busy street, and so we plan to retain full-time construction inspection services for full coverage of the contractor's work. And these services will ensure work is progressing in accordance with the contract documents and will provide coordination of any field issues, unforeseen issues, underground work, kind of go hand in hand, in a timely manner. So we plan to advertise that RFP pretty soon, this month in January, and we'll be recommending the professional services agreement at the March 2024 board meeting. Okay, the bidding and construction schedule. The project was advertised for bidding November and December at the end of last year. We received a lot of interest in a competitive bidding pool in this project. We received 6 bids and opened them. And the bids ranged from 10.8 million to 17.4 million. The engineer's estimate for this project was 11.5 million to 12.5 million. The construction contract, it's a correction there. It's 430 calendar days. So that'll take it from February 2024 to April 2025. After reviewing the bids, the lowest responsive bid was A&B Construction of Oakland, California. They've been conducting business under their name and contracting license, performing similar work for 31 years. And we are requesting authorization for the general manager to approve change orders up to 7% of the contract value. So that brings us to staff recommendation. By motion 1, waive the minor irregularity in the A&B Construction Inc. bid. 2, adopt a resolution awarding the construction contract for main renewal Central Newark Thornton Avenue project, job 21235 to A&B Construction Inc. in the amount of $10,823,439. And 3, authorize the general manager to execute change orders up to 7% of the contract value in a total amount not to exceed $757,640.73 to address unforeseen items that may arise during construction. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Does ACWD have any experience with fully restrained PVC pipe?
Yes, there's been a couple of projects, not the whole project, but there are some segments where we have used Certa-Lock restrained joint pipe before.
Yeah, and I'll add that we've been using that same pipe system from a maintenance standpoint and for new construction jobs that are installed by our own forces for several years. So we've got lots of experience with that system.
Okay. I spent part of this morning trying to trace, working with PG&E to trace a gas line, and they had a tracer wire. Do we have something similar for this to be able to trace and locate it in the future?
Yes, tracer wire is installed as part on top of the PVC pipe for future locating.
Thank you. And
Any other questions, sir? But I do have a question and a comment. So I'm curious, in working with the city of Newark, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is they have this major project to do a below grade bypass under the railroad tracks on Cherry leading to Thornton.
I believe that's Central Avenue. Central, are you referring to the Central Avenue grade separation?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure it's Central Avenue and not, it's not close to this project.
Yeah, so it's just past Central before you get to Thornton.
Correct.
And I'm a little worried that we might be causing huge traffic problems in that area, both while they're working on their project and we're working concurrently on the Thornton project. Do we know what the timeline is for that grade separation project?
Yes, I can answer that question. So they've been working on the design. They're close to 90% design. They think they are 90% design, but the project has slipped by at least 6 months because they're still waiting for PG&E to complete their relocation design. So I don't believe we will be interfacing with their project by the time we're out there. But we will make sure to coordinate with that project sufficiently.
Is that below grade or above grade?
It's an above grade crossing.
Okay,
Mhm.
got it. And I just have a quick comment. Looking back in time, when we came out of the 2008 to 2010 severe recession, and we're still affected by it a dozen years ago, and we were doing our planning, we were talking about $2 million a mile for main renewal, main replacement. Couple of years later, it went up to 3 to 4, then it went up to 5 to 6, and 7 to 8. And when we did Alvarado, it was even more expensive, and now we're looking at $12 million for a mile. And we have like 100 miles that we've got to get done. That translates into $1 billion of cost.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we have 900 miles that
And
will ultimately.
yeah, but if you look at the 4
Yeah,
streets here that we're focusing
Yeah.
on, we could be spending $50 million in one neighborhood in our service area.
yeah. Yeah, and as the board heard from Ms. Ibagunta a while back, you know, we're looking at lots of different ways of doing these main renewals because we know that, you know, traditional means of replacing mains is going to be crazy expensive, and we know that we need to optimize with our resources. So, you know, a project like this, it makes a whole lot of sense. It's all very old asbestos cement, but there's other potential ways that we could use other models that might be less expensive overall, but it's still an extremely expensive endeavor.
And these cost estimates are where we're using the less expensive RJ PVC material. If we were going straight with flexible steel, it would be even more. And one other question about lost track of what I wanted to ask. If I think about it, I'll send it to the staff.
All right. Dr. Huang.
Yes, thank you. I had the pleasure of hearing this item in committee. So thank you for the additional information that I kind of asked for, and you definitely elaborate on it. So thank you very much.
It's the same. I had this in committee. We've asked for it. It's coming. Thank you. It's expensive. But, you know, we are dealing with Thornton Avenue here, so hopefully it'll be some lower cost renewals down the road in some of the smaller streets. Once we're doing these big ones though, the good news is we're doing them. So, and they're pressing ahead. Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion to move staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion and a second. Secretary call the roll.
Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. That, I think, moving on.
Thank you very much.
to-
Yeah,
Thank
now
you.
it's item
Board committee
6.1. And staff stands ready to answer any questions the board may have.
Hearing
Hearing none.
none, then we'll move on to operational reports.
Kind of ditto there too, President Gunther. If the board has any questions, be happy to address them. We didn't plan on presenting anything in particular.
We will see our rainfall go up a little bit in the next couple days. Did look at the distribution monthly hardness, creeped up a little bit, but we're still doing just fine.
Yeah, and just so the board's aware there, and Mr. Aaron's will make sure I don't speak out of tune here, but you'll see some continuing increase there and it'll last a little while. Right now, San Francisco has switched over to local supplies. And when that happens, that San Francisco source is much harder and it's much more difficult to blend down harder sources of groundwater. And so we'll see this harder water go on for a bit, but don't worry, rest assured, it's going to come back down.
Thank you. Any comments, further comments from any board members, operationals? No. Okay, hearing none. Into general manager's report.
That's right. We have just a few short items this evening. First of all, we could do this item, Director Sethy, along with your report on the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project. But one of the things you had requested that staff be prepared to talk about this evening is the finances through the end of the year for that Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project. So Mr. Wunderlich is prepared to talk about that right now if you'd like.
Yes, I'm going to let Mr. Wunderlich do most of my presentation for me.
Okay.
All right, so I'll go ahead and give a quick overview here. I think as the board is aware, the district has previously entered into a multi-party cost share agreement to develop this project, as well as 5 subsequent amendments. And we spent millions of dollars supporting advancements of this project. And I think the general feeling from many of the partner agencies is that they're not interested in a 6th multi-party cost share agreement and would like to see the JPA prioritize its activities to see if we can't get to a formal project agreement within the currently available funding. The current multi-party cost share agreement anticipated that we would get to that point by the end of this fiscal year. I think the negotiations on some of these key project agreements are a little more challenging and taking a little longer than maybe we had hoped they would. And so we're not currently expected to have that done by the end of this fiscal year, but we'd like to stretch out the available dollars that the JPA currently has to see if we can't continue JPA operations on current funding through approximately February of 2025, with the goal of being ready to have service agreements signed and be to the Water Commission for a final funding award by that time, about 13 months from now. And so some of the things that the JPA has presented in terms of its strategy to extend currently available resources include limiting essentially some of what's viewed as the non-essential activities, which depending on your perspective, you may view as essential or not. So for example, design work and permitting work for certain aspects of the project may be slowed down. rather than trying to go full steam ahead with that concurrent with developing all these agreements as we try to conserve the resources and focus them on these agreements. So to give you a quick status update, 100% design for the dam expansion has actually already been submitted to DSOD. So that's actually already pretty far along. Obviously, DSOD may have comments which may necessitate additional work. And so right now, that additional work's not contemplated within the current strategy to preserve current funding. 90% design for a pumping plant that's necessary to deliver project benefits is on schedule to be completed by summer of 2024, so later this year. But we are currently not planning to advance design beyond the 90%. So kind of design work on that would stop this summer. And then for the Transfer Bethany pipeline, they're currently working on a 30% design, but once they reach the 30% design, they would not continue working on that, again, to preserve funds. They're also working on reducing the expenditures on certain consultants to the JPA, including our financial consultant and bond counsel, but a part of that is related to delaying development of certain financial instruments. And so not as much work is needed from those consultants if we're delaying certain financial processes, as well as reducing some costs for a federal lobbyist. However, the JPA cost, these are just JPA controlled costs, are only about a fifth of the total cost, because most of the costs are reimbursed to Contra Costa, as they're the ones actually doing a lot of this work under contract with the JPA. And so JPA staff, our understanding is meeting with Contra Costa, I believe tomorrow, to talk about where Contra Costa thinks it can save some money to preserve funds. And so that's actually more critical than all of the kind of actions the JPA itself can take. One of the things that was also talked about was reducing the frequency of JPA board committee meetings as a way to save money. Because the JPA is fully staffed by consultants, you're paying per hour to prepare committee meetings and attend meetings and so on. I'll say that there was quite a bit of feedback from the JPA board that was concerned about transparency and whether there were significant savings associated with those actions. I would say, though, that for a couple of the committees, the meetings are routinely canceled because there's not always items to discuss. So in general, the executive director and the program management team will be looking into this into some more detail and also considering the feedback from Contra Costa. And the intent is to take this to a future meeting of the finance committee of the JPA, and our very own director Sethy sits on that committee. And so we'll be able to participate in those discussions. And so that's kind of the summary of where the JPA is financially, and really the big picture item is trying to narrow the focus of current activities to those key project agreements, being the facilities usage agreement with Contra Costa, the design and construction agreement with Contra Costa, under which they'll design and construct all of these new facilities, the contract for administration of public benefits with the state of California, and then the service agreements, which are what will actually commit the members to participate in the project. And so really narrowing the focus to developing and finalizing those agreements over the next year. And I'm be happy to take any questions.
I'll
I'd
ask
like to go
the
right now, that's fine.
president if I can just go segue right into
I was gonna ask you if
7.3.
you'd like to.
So first of all, I have really appreciated Mr. Wunderlich prepping me for finance meetings, which are pretty lengthy, and the board meetings, which is very helpful. And we also have staff that sometimes sits in on the finance meetings from the district here, which is good. I think that we have the money to pay for what we want, but we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of negotiating the service agreements and facility usage agreements. And we have an over allocation of demand on the reservoir. And it is very difficult negotiations to provide people the allocation that they want in the reservoir once it's rebuilt. I will say it hasn't been real contentious. I think people are trying to work in as harmonious a way as possible, but it has been and will continue in the near future to be a real struggle. So I'm hoping we can overcome those barriers. And we also had a lot of issues to overcome with reclamation to get their commitments on different parts of the project. And we were hoping to get to the funding from Prop 1 with the California Water Commission at an earlier date, maybe by July 1 of this year, but now that's been delayed to February. And so the program management team, Hallmark, I think is one of the finest I've ever seen work on a project, and I'm speaking from Silicon Valley experience too. Just an absolutely terrific group of people. And they are meticulous, they're detailed, they follow up. They're very knowledgeable. There's so many moving pieces here, but yesterday in the board meeting, I asked some very specific questions about the DWR tie-in agreement. And I wanted to know what the elements of that agreement were and what it encompassed. And I was quite surprised that they knew the answers. That's how deep in the weeds they are with things. So to conclude, yesterday we reappointed our officers the same as we've had since the beginning. So Angela Ramirez Holmes as chair, Anthony Hansen as vice chair, Ellen Weir as secretary, and myself as treasurer. And Chair Holmes will be retiring from the Zone 7 board at the end of her term. I think it ends June 1 or July 1. He's not running for re-election. So we will have a little bit of change in composition and perhaps officers at that point. But all in all, I really like working with this board and with the whole team. It's just a outstanding group of people that have come together. So that's my report. Oh, and I have the board report from yesterday, and I wanted to just at least pass down what the JPA schedule is, so everybody had a chance to see that this evening.
See, as I recall, about 6 months ago, there was an extension of the timeline from at least 2 years on the Bethany Transfer Pipeline, as much as 4 years on the dam. How much farther are we extending it now?
It's well, it's in the report here, but it's going to be at least 2 years because they haven't even started on the acquisition of property, and they may need to do eminent domain in some places.
So for Bethany Transfer, it was 2026, then 2020, now currently 2028, and you're extending it to 2030?
So the current schedule that was included in the board packet for yesterday's meeting shows that construction is complete for the pipeline September 30 of 2028. But given the pause that's anticipated on some of these activities, I would expect further delays. And so that's actually, it's a kind of a challenging part of these discussions is, in the long run, it would be cheaper to continue all of these activities. But I think, partners continue to weigh what their ultimate decision will be. And I think feel like we've given a lot of money and we want to see some results for that money. And so you're kind of starting to get to the point of I think, wanting to know for sure that there's a project before you continue to make contributions. And so, yeah, I think we could be looking at 6 to 12-month delays based on this current strategy to preserve the JPA's existing funds, but that hasn't been developed yet. And I think that's a part of the analysis that the JPA is going to do when they bring this item back to the Finance Committee, because obviously those costs of escalation will, be potentially significant.
Both cost as well as time delays, cost increases. There was discussion, as I understand, or concerns on the part of Contra Costa, whether the JPA was needed to function. Has that issue been resolved? Or do they, Contra Costa felt that maybe the JPA was not a necessary element in this process?
I have never heard that discussed.
Yeah, I haven't heard suggestions from Contra Costa to that effect. I don't really see a path forward for the project without a JPA bringing all of the interested parties together. So no, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, and on the over allocation of LV3, Contra Costa is not participating or taking any water from LV3. Is that still the case?
Yeah, they're not proposing any storage capacity for themselves within the additional capacity that's created. That's correct.
In my position, as we develop more and more opportunities in Del Val, our needs at Las Vaqueras should also correspondingly decline. Personal talk. Thank you.
Director Akbari, Huang. I'd just like to thank Director Sethy for all he's done on this committee and appreciate all your efforts. This is a very complex project. Yes, it's taking a while, but as I was sitting here realizing that, it took us over 20 years to build a fish ladder that everybody wanted. Everybody, was in favor, well, not everybody, but very little opposition.
Not everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, not everyone wanted it, but there was no opposition. It was almost total cooperation with all the agencies, and it still took us 20 years to build 2 fish ladders and some fish crates. So I guess however long it's going to take to get this, we're doing great.
Well, as I keep reminding newcomers to the project, we lived through the entire tear down and rebuild of Calaveras Reservoir and through all of the delays that were unanticipated. And that took a dozen years, right?
Yeah.
So
It'll be expensive. It's going to be difficult, but that's what we got to do.
And now Calaveras is proposed to be raised
There
back
we
to
go.
where it should have been built originally.
And I have to tell you in the back room that the joke among directors is we got to keep this moving forward because people want their names on the plaque that goes on this reservoir.
I actually have a couple of more quick GM reports before we move on to the rest of the director's reports. Kind of late breaking news, and one of them has to do, we're all familiar with the developments related to the voluntary agreements. There's a lot going on. And I want to turn it over to our acting director of water resources, Mr. Nizer, to report on our thoughts about signaling our support for the voluntary agreement concepts with the state.
All right, thank you. So as the board's aware, the State Water Board is currently considering updates to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan focused on the Sacramento River, its tributaries, and Delta areas, including consideration of proposed voluntary agreements, also known as, quote, the agreements to support healthy rivers and landscapes, end quote. Public comments on the State Water Board's draft staff report in support of this update to the Bay Delta Plan are due on January 19th. The State Water Board's draft staff report currently under review is an environmental document that complies with CEQA and other laws and provides the public with an opportunity to review and comment on the analysis of 6 different standalone alternatives, as well as several modular alternatives that could be layered in to standalone alternatives. The report includes analysis of alternatives that represent both the State Board's unimpaired flows approach, the original proposal, to regulating flows, as well as the voluntary agreement approach to addressing watershed-wide flow and habitat, and has been agreed upon and committed to by water users. Staff has been monitoring progress on technical reviews of the report and potential impacts to imported water supplies being conducted by our suppliers. And staff will be submitting a comment letter in support of the voluntary agreement approach, which centers on science-based collaborative and adaptive management in the Delta and would provide significantly reduced environmental effects and more security of the district's imported water supplies as compared to the flows-only approach or the unimpaired hydrograph.
Yeah, so basically signaling our support over the voluntary agreement approach as opposed to the unimpaired flows sort of traditional approach that's been proposed by the water board. So not seeing any strong objections about that. We'll continue on the path that we're on. And lastly, very important business. Had a suggestion. Hey, why don't we think about sort of the seating on the dais, and maybe we should be thinking about changing things up. So, you know, of course, we got our greatest minds together and thought through some options, and thought that, you know, propose this evening. How about it's a new year, we have new officers. How about we change up how we do the seating on the dais such that we rotate every seat every year? So, you know, just as we rotate our board officers, you know, traditionally, we do it that way. And how about we do the same thing? So what that would do is make sure that everybody's kind of moving around all the time. Nobody gets too comfortable. Nobody gets a corner on the market on any particular spot on the dais. And we kind of rotate along those lines. Wanted to throw that out there and say that that's kind of what staff's proposing to do. Next time you all show up to the boardroom, you might have your placard in a different spot. But what do you think about that? Any concerns with staff's thoughts there?
I support it. That's my favorite seat.
As confusing as it might be to change the alphabetical order.
Yeah, we don't want to have to get you guys to legally change your names or anything like that. That would
I have no problem with it.
We only went to alphabetical when we installed computers, as far as I recall. Because
Yeah.
I started my first year at the end of the board.
Yeah, we might have had a different approach in the past, and
Yeah.
hey, why not change it up again, right? So that's what we plan to do. Hey, we can always change it back. There's no board policy about this. It's just kind of convention. So we thought we'd change it up a little bit. So great.
We could include bidding for seats.
No, that's not such a bad idea. We do bid for parking spaces, employee parking spaces for charity. So that's not a bad idea. You guys might see a bill on your chair next time. All right. So with that, that completes our general manager's reports.
Moving on then, item 7.1, Director Akbari. Indian Wells, are you ready?
Yes, yeah. So this is my report from the Aqua Fall Conference in Indian Wells back in November. I think the main thing that kind of stuck with me from the Aqua Conference, I had a couple opportunities to talk to Jonathan Clay there on a variety of topics and to go into a lot more detail, especially around bonds, the politics of the year, and so we just had some very interesting discussions. He kind of talked a little bit tonight about the difficulty of passing so many bonds in a single year, and obviously the primaries are going to be a good litmus test to, on what to expect come November. Yeah, and then went into other topics, but we got a report from Jonathan tonight, so more detail. Yeah.
Okay. And what a better item, there is no better item to end this evening's meeting on. Director Sethy's report from Unlock the Secrets of Successful Communication, Great Ideas to Try in 2024.
Yes. So I joined in on a excellent live webinar last month with Shireen Gonzalez and Renee Gonzalez. Renee was one of the panelists who was presenting. And it was really good for a year-end webinar because it was trying to light a fire under people to think about what could you do at your district that's novel and would be good for public outreach and for public engagement, and try to help educate people on the value of our water district, and with something that ties in with well, for each district, it was something different, including our own. But what attracted me to the presentation from Eastern Municipal Water District is, and that's the second page here, is that they have implemented this water bottle fill station program. And this is something that Director Kohler and I looked at over 10 years ago, but the market was at that time was just developing for water bottles, portable water bottles. And the cost of these fill stations, when we looked at it, I think in the Water Resources Committee, was very high. It was running like $10,000 to $12,000 per unit. And then you had the installation costs. So it didn't seem like it was, both of us agreed it was not really the right time to consider something like this. But after this presentation by Eastern Municipal, I went online and found, dozens of cities across California, water districts, maybe about a dozen, I think, and then cities, municipalities that have installed these. And at Eastern Municipal, they now have installed 168 at a total cost of $4,000 per unit in their community. And they install them they started with the elementary schools, community colleges, the libraries, senior centers, public places, the city halls, libraries, etc. And suddenly a light bulb did go off after I heard this, because now the cost had become much more reasonable. And there's all kinds of ecological sustainability arguments to be made in trying to promote this out to our communities. And in particular, this has a digital reader that provides a count on how many plastic bottles are being saved based on the refill usage and everything. So I would like to make a formal request that the staff take a look at implementing a program like this, and take a look at the costs and maybe an implementation schedule. I would say, if we did 25 a year, that's 100,000 a year. Maybe we go up to 40 a year in our Tri-City area. But I printed out the exact vendor that was selected by Eastern Municipal, and it was also selected by Rancho Valley Water District close by down there. And there are reasons for why they selected this particular unit. And it doesn't have filters. It's not delivering cooled water. It's just fresh water, a freshwater dispenser. So I'd like the staff to take a look at it, maybe bring it back to like the Water Resources Committee, and see if we can roll something out here. I have two additional understandings from my research. One is they got a volume discount on this price. So that's per unit. So we could be looking at a negotiated volume discount. Number two, both of these entities are using a outside contractor to put these in. It is a veterans organization that has plumbing expertise. And so you're creating jobs for a niche job market out there. I think it's called Vet Org, something like that. But if you just do a cursory look on the internet, you start to see a sprinkle of water districts doing this around the state. And I think this would be a very exciting program for our staff to work on. There's a lot of promotional opportunities, how this impacts the environment in our community. And it engages both the water resources staff from an operational implementation standpoint, but also our public affairs, public relations folks. So I hope I have the support of the other board members here to take a detailed look at and work a plan if it looks feasible.
Yeah, I would support this idea, and Dr. Sethy, you said the perfect word that I was looking for, no filters. As long as the unit we're looking at do not have filters, I'm perfectly fine. Because our message has always been our water is safe to drink and it tastes great as is, right?
Yeah,
So that's one condition, no
Mhm.
filters, please. I would also like to ask staff in your evaluation, look at maintenance cost,
Mhm.
right? We can't just plop them down. Somebody has to maintain it, especially if we put them in schools.
Yeah.
How would that work out? So please also look at that as part of logistic and your evaluation, please.
Yeah, I think if, I'm seeing obviously more than one, so I'm seeing two directors, concur with the idea. And so what staff can do is kind of get more information about how this might work, talk to these folks who have installed these, understand what the model they use is, or who owns these devices after they're installed, who's, all the issues associated with, installing things out in the field and so forth and so on, and bring back some additional information. You suggest to committee, I think that's great. We can bring some information back to committee first and then go from there. I do remember when we did an evaluation of this in years past, it's been a long time and no doubt things have changed. I do recall that it wasn't seen as something that was great, a good fit at that time. So we got some more information to do, more digging to do.
Oh, I'll just say that I also wanted to add on that I'm happy to look into this, and Director Weed and I sit on water resources conversation, so we'd be happy to add this to our agenda and go through it in more detail.
I'll share the other market research I did with the staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Director Weed?
Yeah, no, I'm supportive. I have two items.
Okay, I'm fully in support. I noticed it's either my last or the flight before going through the San Francisco, the airport, several of these out of service. So one possible suggestion might be to work with the schools for pilot installations in the junior highs or high schools. If they could last there, they could last anywhere. And they'd be in a controlled environment. I think that might be a good fit to start. I mean, San Francisco Airport is certainly another very difficult environment, and they are used extensively over there. And they were a wonderful tool when I remember to bring my bottle. So, Director Weed.
Okay, two items. The environmental impact statement for Delta Conveyance was issued last month. They're going to have a meeting on as quickly as they can, which I think is Wednesday, January 24th, to adopt it. In that environmental impact statement, though, is some numbers that may be of interest to us. They're suggesting, and what may become the norm for the state on major projects, sea level rise of a foot per decade for each of the next 100 years. So 10.2 feet, 7 feet by the year 2100. There are two maps, interactive maps that I've provided to staff, one produced by NOAA, which gives you the best visuals of what's going to be flooded on a 1 foot basis for every 10 years. And the second is a group called Climate Challenge. The NOAA map did not go into the Delta. Climate Challenge does. So it is sobering to see how much the delta is going to be underwater. An example is a Bosca is supporting a purified water in San Mateo County, which will be in Redwood City, is the current proposal, just south of Foster City. Until 2040, you're fine. After 2040, it goes underwater, and at the service life of the project for 100 years, it'll be under 6 feet of water, as will be much of Redwood City. So these are, and then in the case of Fremont, which has not, and may now have, but my last report was, had not bought into supporting a BCDC alignment for the bay in San Francisco. So this future shoreline has not been identified, and which will be 100 feet for BCDC. They are preparing a shoreline for Alameda County from the southern border of Union City to Emeryville. We're the gap. Newark is behind that. It'll be interesting times. And this gives you some strong visuals to see what'll be underwater and how much. Well, thank you.
Further director comments?
Before we adjourn, I had one other comment to make, and that was, even though we have nobody on Zoom right now, I just want, in case folks are watching the video and they see papers being handed out to the board and to staff, the papers that were being handed out had to do with Director Sethy's report and had to do with the water bottle filling stations. And that document is already on our website for this meeting under supplemental materials. So I just want to make sure the record indicates that all the materials that we're reviewing tonight are all and have been publicly available. With that, staff has no further items.
With that, then I will declare the meeting adjourned.